Hello, I'm Deborah Malone, founder of The Internationalist and host of Internationalist Marketing TV. Today's guest is Dave Knox, a past internationalist innovator and now executive director of Blue North, a community of entrepreneurs in Northern Kentucky. Dave, it is always a pleasure to see you, and I am absolutely delighted to welcome you to the show.
Hey, thank you. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, and as am I, because it's been a long time since we've actually reconnected. And dare I say that I think the last time may have been guilty. That was when the Internationalist named you one of our innovators for your work as CMO of Rockfish, which I think a lot of our audience knows was one of the fastest growing agencies in the US. But you have always navigated the worlds of brand marketing, of technology, and entrepreneurship. So, why don't you fill in some of the gaps on that journey and tell us a little bit of where you went after Rockfish? I know there was the Brandery and now Blue North, but we'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, of course. So I always talk about my life's kind of been, call it three chapters, roughly, if you will. So chapter one was what kind of set me on the path, which was at Procter Gamble to start my career. Ultimately, was one of our founders of our corporate digital strategy team, and was fortunate enough to be at the emergence of Web 2.0, working closely with Facebook and Twitter and all of Silicon Valley and that. That's what led me to Rockfish. So it was Rockfish from 2010 through 2017. Had a chance to start the Cincinnati office when I joined. And that's actually the same summer we started the Brandery. So Rockfish and the Brandery were done in parallel. As I always talk about, the day job was working with some of the biggest brands out there. And then nights and weekends we're working with startups that want to knock those same guys off their pedestal. So I got to have a foot in kind of both worlds, if you will. So after WPP purchased Rockfish, around end of 2017 is when I shut the book on that second chapter and kind of moved into the third one that I call it my portfolio life that I've been spending the last few years doing. So it's been a hodgepodge of different things. One was fortunate enough to write a book predicting the turn that you see. So I did that, and that put me on doing some keynote speaking, some things of that nature. Then I have been a pretty active investor, you could say, in terms of angel investor, venture capital, sit on around 5 or 6 different board of directors. So spend time with those investments, helping them in a wide range from craft breweries to tech startups. And then the final bucket had been this what I call executive marketing coaching, where I was working with a lot of Series B onwards companies to kind of think about their marketing, not just strategy, but their overall organization. How did it need to evolve, to change, and really be positioned for this kind of new environment? So that's really been the heart of the portfolio life, I would call it. I had a brief detour in there where I bought a small business called Nature's Willow that was a natural pain relief cream. So bought that, relaunched it, rebranded it, expanded it to Walmart and Rite Aid and CVS, and actually just sold that this past January. And that's what's led me into this new role with Blue North, which is, I'd call it kind of a public service hat, if you will. So Blue North is a really interesting organization that's funded by the state of Kentucky from their Cabinet for Economic Development, or as they call it, KY Innovation. And we're meant to be a front door for entrepreneurs here in Northern Kentucky. And when I say Northern Kentucky, it is the 11 counties south of the Ohio River that are the, call it suburbs of Cincinnati across the board. And it's a really interesting environment with some really great startups and entrepreneurs, and we're meant to be a resource for them. So I get to spend my day helping those entrepreneurs remove the barriers, make the connections, and hopefully change the world across the board.
Well, that sounds like not only a dream job, but it sounds like you are absolutely well prepared for doing it. And I love the fact that it seems that you're always working a day job and a night job, whether that's with two experiences or with both beer and technology as part of your portfolio entails. But thanks for talking a little bit about Northern Kentucky, because one of the things that I find quite interesting is sometimes how regions themselves lend themselves to a mission of any entrepreneurial organization. And you talked a little bit about the connection to Cincinnati, but I'd love to know more about Northern Kentucky specifically as it relates to Blue North.
Yeah, so that point on the kind of the regional, it's one that I believe for a long time. When we were launching the brandery, one of our first conversations was with David Cohen, the founder of Techstars. And he made a comment that I still use today where he said, every ecosystem should be built on the shoulders of the giants that built the city before it. And we started the brandery because our giants were Procter & Gamble and Kroger and the brand building industry as a whole. And that's what led us to do a lot of what we were doing. Now, when you look at Northern Kentucky, we are kind of building our future on the future of digital commerce as one of our key tent poles, if you will. And we say that because the industry has chosen one of the identities for Northern Kentucky, and our job is to embrace it. And what I mean by that is we have an amazing resource that comes from geography. 60% of the United States is within about an 8-hour drive of Northern Kentucky. We sit at an intersection of, 75, 71, some of the biggest kind of transportation highways in the United States. But we also sit geographically from a center of the country. So about 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago now, Amazon announced that they were going to be basing their Amazon Prime Air hub out of CVG. You add that to the fact, and CVG is our airport. That's our acronym for it. But along with that, DHL also has their global headquarters for their cargo transportation in the US. And we just became the second largest DHL cargo hub in the country, or in the world, actually. So the industry has chosen us as this kind of center of digital commerce, if you will. And a lot of our efforts of how do we embrace that? Because it's not about just being logistics or supply chain. Those are, I think, easy ways to describe it, but it's really the whole spectrum of what that means. How do we think about the brands that are based around it, the manufacturing, the supply chain, but also the last mile delivery and everything that goes into it? So that is a major focus for us. A second large focus is around life sciences. So we surprisingly have a really a pretty amazing life sciences that exists. Part of that spawned because of the broader Cincinnati. Cincinnati Children's is one of the top children's hospitals in the country. And many of their programs are actually the top ones in the country. And so we have companies like Bexion, which is just entered phase 2 human clinical for prostate cancer, using some technology that was commercialized actually from Children's Hospital, but also from Procter & Gamble, because the founder of it was one of the head R&D scientists at Procter & Gamble when they were in pharmaceuticals. And when P&G shut down pharmaceuticals, he stayed in the region and kept doing what he was doing. We also have an amazing company called Gravity Diagnostics that during COVID became one of the top diagnostics and testing facilities in the country, and largely thanks in part to their partnership with Kroger and others. So our life sciences have actually been built on the shoulders of some of those giants from the Cincinnati side. And it's a little bit of a unique, we are one of the truly only tri-states, if you will, if you look in the country, because we sit the intersection of Ohio, Kentucky, and a little small part of Indiana as well. But in many ways, Northern Kentucky is kind of like the role that New Jersey plays with New York City, or that Connecticut plays, that it's really tough to really think, yes, there's a body of water as the dividing line, but no one, you still say you're from a region that plays out.
I think that's interesting, and it used to be that geography determined destiny at one point. So many cities built on rivers, and then what happened was so many big airports, like Atlanta, becoming bigger hubs and everything, growing, in that regard. I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, particularly about the shoulders of giants. But I also think that we're really seeing a growing consciousness now among corporations and their connection with not only doing more for local communities and doing more for startups and working more with nonprofits on certain areas, or even collaborating with governments. And you're kind of uniquely positioned to kind of look at a lot of those areas. You mentioned being a P&G alum, you're an investor, you're an entrepreneur, you're an author, which we will talk about in a minute. But do you think, particularly in light of the title of your book, with that juxtaposition between blue chips and startups, do you think there's a point of intersection where large and small businesses can help each other? I know there's a lot about disruption with small and scale with large, but we're seeing so much change now. I'd love you to address that.
Yeah, it's, one of the unique things in our region is that participation that we have from those corporations that you really don't get in a lot of places. So if you look at my board of directors, just as a simple place, I have, a judge executive, which is essentially the CEO of our county government, is my board chair. I have somebody from the Cincinnati Airport, CVG, that's on my board. I have somebody from St. Elizabeth Hospital, who is actually an old P&G colleague of mine that now leads marketing at the largest regional hospital chain. We have somebody from Northern Kentucky University that sits on it. So we actually have representatives from the large companies, from the public entities, from the educational systems, all coming together around this concept of entrepreneurship. And I actually think CVG is probably one of the most interesting. I don't think they publicly disclose how many experiments they've done, but their innovation team, I think, is one of the best incubators we have in the region. And I put them on par, frankly, with Kroger and Procter Gamble, despite an airport being very different than one of those corporations. But, an example, there's a company called ThorDrive. That ThorDrive was a South Korean company that was working on autonomous vehicles. And they were based in San Francisco. And at one point had the realization that the billions of dollars that the Googles of the world were throwing at autonomous was going to be pretty difficult for them to break through separate. They had met with Cincinnati's airport, with CVG at one point, and sparked on this idea that their autonomous could actually be a solution for cargo and for the needs of moving luggage and cargo and everything else. And they end up moving the company here to Northern Kentucky and to Cincinnati to be the test lab for them to do this experimentation. That's something you don't see every day. Most of the time people want it proven and figured out. And the team that leads all of that work over at CVG said, let's experiment. Let's see what we can do with this. And they have done that with countless examples, kind of across the board, even down to one of their Internet of Things experiments with the train moving between the terminals to be able to get you a precise time that it's going to be arriving using one of our local IoT startups. So there's just a ton of experiment, I think, that can take place where those partners can really come from the private and public world coming together to experiment.
They're great examples. Just out of curiosity, what do you think that means for today's business models? I mean, I know that's a big question, but obviously they're changing.
Yeah, it's changing immensely. I, for instance, just came from a meeting with one of the board chairs of one of our largest local universities, and that's what they're having to figure out. They, as a 4-year institution, they have 100% of their student body is now taking at least one online class. I think it was something like 30 to 40% are online only that never even come to the campus. And when you think about the things that used to be the amenities that they had to invest in, dorms and buildings and everything else, where's that change? And where geography used to be a competitive advantage, now it can be a disadvantage or an advantage at the same token. So all business models have to be thinking about how they reinvent themselves just to really think about that surviving. And one of the things that, Yeah, I didn't expect predicting to the turn to stay evergreen in the way it has. But one of the things in there is the innovation matrix that was created by Monitor, and it talks about core innovation, adjacent innovation, and transformational innovation. And one of the things they talk about with core innovation is it can be a leaky bucket if somebody doesn't focus on it. That even your core business, you need to constantly be innovating, because if you don't, it doesn't matter what gains you make on the other side, you're going to be losing something out the back. And that's what I think big companies need to be thinking about is it's oftentimes the death of 1,000 cuts that leads to the eventual erosion, not one almighty innovation that was your death now. And that's how innovation needs to be approached.
So that I find absolutely fascinating, and I would absolutely recommend the book. It's amazing to me that it was written in 2017, and the lessons, even through a pandemic where so much was upset and changed, that the lessons are still very much alive now. Do you want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, it's one of the things I've found is it's predicting the turn is taking on a different meaning. When I give the talks I give, one of the things I used to start with a few slides that talked about this is about this intersection of big companies and startups and how industries are being transformed. But today, coming out of the pandemic, it's actually a transformation driven by consumer behaviors that are causing responses that have to happen both by the big companies and by the startups as well. And so both sides now have to predict the turn, and the turn being how the consumer behavior has changed. And things that have been disrupted probably permanently. When you just look at even down to, I joke with the craft breweries I'm involved with, happy hours on Fridays used to be one of our best things in the world. But today, in a hybrid work environment, people work downtown Tuesday through Thursday. And so Thursday is an amazing time for our downtown locations. Fridays become really good for our suburban locations because everyone's working from home still on the Monday and Friday. And you just have these evolutions that even the most simple thing is happy hour has changed because of this new kind of turn that's taken place.
Do you think you could describe the connection between marketing innovation and entrepreneurial success? I mean, because you're really a marketer at heart, and it's that kind of thinking that has enabled you to do so much else.
Yeah, I go back, the thing I love so much about the training of Procter Gamble is the training of brand management is a training on consumer understanding. And that's at the heart of, if you look at business model canvas and all these other things that are tossed around, they're actually going back to very simple things. At P&G in the brand building framework, you start with assess the landscape. What is out there? What's going on? What's taking place? And these societal trends, industry trends, those are all things that go into assessing the landscape. But then you start from building upon that with the who. And the who is your consumer. And who are you going after? Your prime prospects, your target audience, et cetera. Those two pieces are the heart of any entrepreneurial journey as well. What is going on in an industry, and how am I going to find that unique audience to go off and target around it, and that first step, et cetera. So that's where, I think that intersection takes place, is actually those two worlds, and taking those very fundamental principles that were how you built Old Spice and Tide and Febreze, and actually applying the same thing to think about the world of startups. And it's not just, oh, this is a cool innovation, but what's its realm? Where does it fit with the industry? Who's the target audience that we can go after? What's the unique points of parity? What's the point of difference? Those are all the things that matter. It's just taking them in a slightly different facet, if you will.
So are you finding that, like so many other things, that the entrepreneurial mindset has also evolved? Whereas maybe at one point people associated entrepreneurism just with technology. I mean, not that that's not a major point of it, but that now people see it as a real opportunity to do something meaningful, or how could you talk about what you're finding in defining something like that?
Yeah, I think the word entrepreneur is still misunderstood and misused at times. And what I always kind of talk about is I have always been entrepreneurial, but I've not always been an entrepreneur. And those words get tossed around at the same token, but I hold a pretty special place and a high pedestal for what it means to be an entrepreneur. You know, an entrepreneur means you've literally had to, not be able to pay your mortgage on a month because it's all on you. You're the load bearing wall. There's no W-2 coming in. There's no check coming in. It's all on you. And you are, to use the words of Kipling, risking it all on one pitch and toss. Like that's what it means to be an entrepreneur. In the first 17 years of my career, I was entrepreneurial, at P&G, even at Rockfish. I wasn't the founder of Rockfish. Amazing entrepreneur Kenny Tomlin was the founder of that. There's a big difference there of how you approach and how you think about it. It wasn't until I really went on my own post Rockfish that I was an entrepreneur, that it was the income coming in was all on me. And if we could pay health insurance, pay the mortgage, do anything that month, that's what was coming from. So that's how I think about the difference between the two. What I love seeing is the rise of entrepreneurial thinking across all of society, whether it's at the big companies, whether it's within nonprofits, whether it's within education. What we haven't been able to do, I think, enough is incentivize people to be entrepreneurs within those environments and make different bets across the board. The joke I always do with some of my Fortune 500 peers, would you be willing to take half of your salary to have 1% of whatever idea you're betting on and you're creating? If you are, then you can be an entrepreneur. But if not, you're just still going to be entrepreneurial within that environment. So I'd love to see us incentivize more of those within different aspects and different places.
Now, is Blue North incentivizing entrepreneurs?
So we are just starting on that journey to figure out what we can look at with that across the board. Our structure is first and foremost be that front door for entrepreneurs. But we are, one of the things that I love that the state has done is they've given us funding to support some of the local organizations that are building amazing entrepreneurs. So we're able to support Northern Kentucky University with their Center for Innovation. We're able to do that with this amazing program called Incubator Kitchen that has had 170 food and beverage entrepreneurs come out. And we're able to do it with a program called Aviatra that's focused on women entrepreneurship. So we do that. And then we create other programs across the board that can support entrepreneurs. But we've got some things in the work that hopefully we'll be announcing soon that are more of those betting on the entrepreneurs in a pretty big way.
But those three initiatives sound absolutely terrific to me. To keep you busy between, everything from women to connecting with schools. And you're just seeing so much more of that. I'd be curious if you're seeing trends in certain entrepreneurial ideas. I mean, obviously, we talked about the importance of geography and for you and what that means. But you sometimes see general trends like young entrepreneurs are interested in doing something for the climate or doing something to mitigate plastics and packaging or whatever it is. Are you noticing trends like that, or is it really too early? Because you're pretty new in your role.
Yeah, I'm new into it. Well, I'd say there's always trends that are coming about and, things constantly cycling just because of what's a focus from investing and other aspects, if you will. And there are larger societal trends as you talk, the sustainability, et cetera. What we've seen just in the last 4 months has really been the reset that's happening in the venture capital space and what that's actually causing. And what I mean by that is there's a return taking place, I think, in a very good way towards business fundamentals. That if I'm building a business that only exists if I raise that next round of venture capital, might not be the best business, if you will. But now we're seeing a rise to really thinking about those things and really thinking about profitable business models from almost day one, if you will. And how do I use this initial funding to get me to that next stage of what that could be? So that is a big shift, partly being driven by, how funding has changed, but also being driven by, I think, an interest of being more in control and not having to make a decision just if something externally changes across the board, which we saw that same thing in 2008. We saw that same thing in 2001. We've just been a little overdue for that change and that reset this time around.
Well, it also marries well with your description of a true entrepreneur. You would think that that level of control and knowing that you could be self-sufficient in your venture and in your idea might mean more to you and having a lasting and sustaining company than simply doing something quickly for the benefit of an IPO. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think, as we say, there's evolution and mindsets change. Well, listen, I'd love to keep talking with you. Let me just close with one question, and that's really, even though you've hinted at it a bit, what's next for you and Blue North?
Yeah, I appreciate that. What's next with Blue North is, really doubling down on some of the focus areas that we're looking at. One is we have a really interesting opportunity around veteran entrepreneurship in this country overall. But here in Northern Kentucky, the Disabled American Veterans, DAV, which is one of the largest charities out there for veterans, has acquired a program called the Patriot Boot Camp that is dedicated to helping those veteran entrepreneurs, particularly tech-focused veteran entrepreneurs. So that's a program I'm super excited about. They just had their first program here in Northern Kentucky about 2 weeks ago. So we're going to be really focused on that as a super exciting initiative for next year. The second is we are looking at how do we support all kinds of entrepreneurs, from tech entrepreneurs all the ways through Main Street entrepreneurs, to unlock new ways that they can go off and kind of live their dreams. So we're hopefully pioneering some new models that, while we are a nonprofit for Blue North, I don't believe you can teach entrepreneurship by only relying on donations. So we're working on some of our own entrepreneurial business models, if you will, to change how we think about that support and that funding across the board. But the final thing is just uncovering the amazing stories. I think every day I get to meet an entrepreneur that is building here in Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky that, because they didn't raise venture capital, they didn't seek the headlines, they're not getting the attention they deserve. And that's actually the most fun part about this job, is uncovering those stories and elevating them to the platform that they deserve. So for me, that's the thing I'm most excited about, is helping them unlock and grow and give them the unfair advantage.
That sounds wonderful. And I have no doubt that you'll be able to do it with not only your vast experience and varied experience, but more importantly, with the passion that anyone can easily see that you are devoting to this. So what a pleasure. And I would love to continue talking and hear more about those programs and where they go. So thanks so much.
We'll have some updates for you in the coming weeks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Talk to you soon, I hope.
Thank you.
The Internationalist focuses on the continual reinvention of marketing by highlighting inspirational marketers around the world and their ideas as they move the industry forward. Internationalist Marketing TV shares these perspectives through interviews and personal